Since the Middle Ages, the Jesuits' core agenda has had to do with compelling their followers to renounce the authority of the Bible in favor of the authority of the Pope. Then in the 19th century, their movement gained momentum, and through their textual critics, they insisted that the Bible was a flawed book, and they set about trying to prove all the flaws they could to the world. And at the same time, they officially declared through Vatican Council I that the Pope was infallible. So their message was clear: don't trust the Bible, trust the Pope. The Bible's a flawed book, the Pope is infallible. And so this brought everything full circle to the conflict that had been raging for hundreds of years throughout the Middle Ages. And that's ultimately what their meeting in Chieri, Italy was all about.
The information discussed by Jesuit leaders in Chieri was published in 1848 by a former Jesuit initiate named Jacopo Leone. His book was titled The Jesuit Conspiracy, The Secret Plan of the Order. In it, he claimed to have overheard the plans of Jesuit leaders and was compelled to write down the information and publish it as a warning to the rest of the world. Leone wrote specifically of how the Jesuits intended to take control of the Bible. Allegedly, they said, "Then the Bible, that serpent which, with head erect and eyes flashing fire, threatens us with its venom, shall be changed again into a rod as soon as we are able to seize it. O then, mysterious rod, we will not again suffer thee to escape from our hands. For you know too well that for 3 centuries past this cruel asp has left us no repose. You well know with what folds it entwines us, and with what fangs it gnaws us." According to Leone, one of the Jesuits openly admitted that the scriptures do not support the Roman Catholic faith. Speaking of the Bible, he said, "If I may tell you openly what I think of this book, it is not at all for us. It is against us. I do not wonder at the invincible obstinacy it engenders in all those who regard its verses as inspired. In the simplicity of youth, I fully expected, on opening the New Testament, to find there the authority of a superior chief in the church, the worship of the Virgin, the Mass, purgatory, relics. But in every page I found my expectations disappointed. At last, after having read at least 6 times over that little book, I was forced to acknowledge to myself that it actually sets forth a system of religion altogether different."
What this Jesuit priest acknowledged all the way back in the 19th century is the same thing that the Reformers acknowledged. They noticed that the teachings of the Bible and the teachings of the Pope were dramatically different. The difference is that the Reformers chose to follow the Bible, while the Jesuits chose to fight against it on behalf of the traditions and power of the Catholic Church.
The view of the Jesuits toward the Bible could be likened to that of the ancient Pharisees 2,000 years ago who opposed Christ. As Jesus said of them, "Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition." And again he said, "In vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." At their meeting in Chieri in 1825, the Jesuits discussed the methods to be used in their ongoing counter-reformation and their plan for the subversion of the Bible. They said specifically that a few breaches made in Protestantism, whether these conversions proceed from genuine motives or whether they be determined by advantageous offers, which shall not be spared, if the person be worth the trouble. We ought, by every possible means, to secure the aid of modern thinkers. If they can be induced to write at all in our favor, let us pay them well, either in money or in laudation.
The Jesuits, since the Middle Ages, have been known for seducing people outside the Catholic Church, even members of Protestant churches, and making deals with them to help the cause of Rome. And this was especially revealed in the 19th century during what was called the Oxford Movement in England. And it was in the wake of this movement that the Vatican really pushed to try and take control of the Bible. And that's why it's so important to understand what the Oxford Movement was all about.
In 1833, the Oxford Movement started. That's perhaps not without significance that we're not only looking at what Rome is doing, we have to consider that the Lord himself will bring judgment on a nation that forsakes him and forsakes the Word of God. The Oxford Movement was an attempt effectively to Romanize the Church of England and to get the Church of England away from the Scriptures, from the King James Bible, and back to the ritualistic practices of Rome. Now, it was done in a very subtle manner, and it really typified the Jesuit approach of Bishop Orton, which is, above all, not too much zeal. And it tried to portray the true position of the Church of England as a sort of a middle-of-the-road organisation. But at the same time, it did promote what it called a high view of the sacraments, so that although it professed to be against what it regarded as extreme Protestants, that is to say Bible-believing evangelicals, and also what it regarded as extreme Romanism, say the persecutions by Catholicism and so on, the Inquisition perhaps. Nevertheless, it sought gradually, by publications of what were called tracts for our times, to give a favourable view to things like the Roman Mass.
In 1898, a man named Walter Walsh published a book titled The Secret History of the Oxford Movement. In it, he writes about the activities of the Jesuits in England. He recorded the testimony of a former Catholic priest who told him, "In England, there are a greater number of Jesuits than in Italy. There are Jesuits in all classes of society, in Parliament, among the English clergy, among the Protestant laity, even in the higher stations." He went on to say, "I could not comprehend how a Jesuit could be a Protestant, or how a Protestant could be a Jesuit. But my confessor silenced my scruples by telling me that St. Paul became as a Jew, that he might save the Jews. It was no wonder, therefore, if a Jesuit should feign himself a Protestant for the conversion of Protestants." Within less than 20 years after the Oxford Movement, another movement began in the world of biblical scholarship that would almost completely transform the understanding of the Bible. This transformation would be effected by men who were of the Protestant profession, but strangely worked in cooperation with Rome.